हेलो गाइस, वेलकम बैक टू द चैनल यूट्यूब टीम स्टेफाइट एंड कंटिन्यू करते हैं हमारे बीए फिलोसफी ऑनर्स के सेम 3 के कोर्स के साथ। इन द प्रीवियस वीडियो द पार्ट 1 ऑफ दिस दैट वी आर स्टडीइंग सोशल एंड पॉलिटिकल फिलोसफी यूनिट 1 व्हाट इज पॉलिटिकल फिलोसफी बाय लियो स्ट्रॉस। We discussed about what is philosophy, what is political philosophy, how today political philosophy has come to an end, and what are some features of the positivistic social sciences, that they don't include value judgments, they don't include the moral judgments, which according to Leo Strauss is not correct. Now we will be studying in this video 3 or 4 reasons of how Leo Strauss says that no matter how detached the positivistic social sciences try to be from value and moral judgments, it's not entirely possible. The moral judgments, the value judgments, the ethical judgments of anything do come into play at some point or the other, even unknowingly, even if we don't intend them to be. Firstly, it is impossible to study social phenomena, that is all important social phenomena, without making value judgments. So ये हमने पढ़ा था previous video में that the positivistic social sciences today, to make them scientific in approach, there is a very popular wave these days that the value judgments have to be removed from them. Only the observed facts and the general facts are to be stated when we need to have a scientific approach towards any subject. But Leo Strauss here says that no social phenomena, all the sciences, social sciences today, which we deem to be positive sciences, even they need to have value judgments. So to study social phenomena, because we are studying about the human affairs, they need to have value judgment. A man who sees no reason for not despising people, whose horizon is limited to their consumption of food and their digestion, may be a tolerable ecometrist. He cannot say anything relevant about the character of human society. A man who refuses to distinguish between great statesmen, mediocrities, and insane impostors may be a good bibliographer. He cannot say anything relevant about politics and political history. A man who cannot distinguish between a profound religious thought and a languishing superstition may be a good statistician. He cannot say anything relevant about the sociology of religion. Generally speaking, it is impossible to understand thought or action or work without evaluating it. So in very simple words, that has been, told us here that, any person who cannot distinguish between, who has no reason for despising people, whose horizon is only limited to the consumption of their own food. That means the people who just have the job of consuming their own food and, digesting it. That means that they don't have anything to do with the common good, to spread, the goodness, unity, values into society. Then that person, okay, that means the person who has no reason for despising such people, who are not really concerned with the good and the welfare of society, that person is just an econometrist. That person cannot be a social science person, that person cannot be a philosopher, political philosopher, as to say. And the same goes to a bibliographer. Just he or she may be a good bibliographer, but then cannot be a good political philosopher if he refuses to distinguish between the great statesmen and the imposters, the insane imposters. So we're just here making a comparison, and what Leo is trying to tell us is that for a person to be a political philosopher, there needs evaluation. Okay, so like generally speaking, we cannot understand any thought, any action, the underlying intention behind it without evaluating it, and evaluating from the point of view of value, ethics, and moral judgments. Morally, ethically, and value-based evaluation is necessary for any thought and action. So as it is that for the positive sciences, they claim to hold a scientific approach towards the subjects by evaluating all the moral and value-based judgments, that is not the correct approach. There needs to be the inclusion of morals and values. If we are unable to evaluate adequately, as we frequently are, we have not yet succeeded in understanding adequately. The value judgments which are forbidden to enter through the front door of political science, sociology, or economics enter these disciplines through the back door. They come from that annex of present-day social science which is called psychopathology. So you know sociology, economics, or be it political science, be it psychology. These are some of the social sciences which come under the arena of positive sciences today, and they come under the arena of positive sciences in a way that they do not evaluate. If you are new to the channel, if you have not seen that, this is something that we've already discussed in the previous semester, when we were discussing about ethics. So when we discussed about ethics, we in detail discussed about the positive sciences, the normative sciences, what are the difference. So what the writer is trying to tell us here is that in sociology, in economics, these are all positive social sciences. So these are social sciences, but they only deal with the general and the observed facts, and they do not make any value judgments. Now that is something wrong. Okay, and what the writer is also trying to say is that the value judgments may not enter these positive social sciences through the front door. By the front door, they mean is that maybe directly they're not engaging with value judgments, they are detaching themselves and avoiding value judgments. But from the back door, that means indirectly somehow the value judgments are incurred. So no matter how hard one tries, how hard a sociologist or economist or a political scientist try to be as value free and ethically neutral as possible, it's not really entirely possible. Somewhere or the other, these value judgments and these moral judgments do enter the arena of these positive social sciences. Social scientists see themselves compelled to speak of unbalanced, neurotic, maladjusted people. So, through psychopathology, like psychopathology is one such subject which may be a positive social science, but still the value judgments do enter its arena. How? Because somewhere or the other we are judging people. Now these terms such as unbalanced, neurotic, maladjusted, these may be scientific from the perspective, but still they do include the value judgments in some way or the other. These value judgments are distinguished from those used by the great historians, not by greater clarity or certainty, but merely by their poverty. A slick operator is as well adjusted as he may be better adjusted than a good man or a good citizen. So now that is also a case that we are calling, like for example, we may be distinguishing or using the terms as neurotic, maladjusted, unbalanced, but still these terms are not considered as value judgments or moral judgments. These are considered just a part of a scientific theory of that subject, the judgment of that subject, and they are not distinguished very much by greater clarity. But yes, these are somewhere value judgments. We may not say that these are value judgments, we may not claim them to be value judgments, but they are somewhere or the other. Finally, we must not overlook the invisible value judgments, which are concealed from undiscerning eyes, but nevertheless most effective in allegedly purely descriptive concepts. So we cannot overlook the invisible value judgments. That again, the same thing that I'm trying to say, that the positive social sciences, they claim they do not engage in any value judgments, but they come from the back door. That means they are indirectly included, they are invisible in the theory of these subjects. For example, when social scientists distinguish between democratic and authoritarian habits of types of human beings, what they call authoritarian is in all cases known to me a caricature of everything of which they, as good democrats of a certain kind, disapprove. Or when they speak of three principles of legitimacy, rational and traditional and charismatic, their very expression, routinization of charisma, betrays a Protestant or liberal preference with no conservative Jew and no Catholic would accept. In the light of the notion of routinization of charisma, the geniuses of the halakha out of biblical prophecy on the one hand, and the genesis of the Catholic Church out of the New Testament teaching necessarily appear as cases of routinization of charisma. So again, for here the writer has given us two examples. The first example is of an authoritarian and a democratic person. Now, in a positivistic social science such as the political science or any other positivistic social science, you will not find a direct value analysis that democracy is good or authoritarianism is not good, it's bad, it should be condemned, anything like this. In a true positivistic social science, there they will just uh, list down their characteristics, what democracy is and what authoritarianism is. But somewhere or the other, while defining authoritarianism, they would list all those characters that they would disapprove in a good democratic person. So somewhere or the other, there may be, they may claim that they are completely value free and ethically neutral, but it's not practically possible to be ethically neutral. It's not practically possible to be that scientific or positivistic as they claim to be. Or when they speak of three principles of like legitimacy, rational, traditional, and charismatic. So their expression is of routinization of charisma, betrays a Protestant or liberal preference which no conservative Jew and no Catholic would accept. So again, there is a comparison, and when they claim such values and such ideals as legitimacy or rationalism or tradition or charisma, so we will see that any conservative Jew and any Catholic will not accept the Protestant or the liberal ideas and ideals, because it's true that the Catholic will always be, who deeply follows Catholicism will always be traditional somewhere or the other in their approach, because that is what Catholicism means. Okay. If the objection should be made that value judgments are indeed inevitable in social science but have a merely conditional character, I would reply as follows. Are the conditions in question not necessarily fulfilled when we are interested in social phenomena? So now here we are claiming that the objection is that the value judgments are indeed inevitable but have merely a conditional character. That means there is a claim that is being taken out, that the value judgments, okay, you claim that the value judgments are inevitable, they are somewhere or the other through the back door, they do enter the positivistic social sciences, then they have a conditional character in the sense that they are only used or they are only included when there are certain conditions or certain circumstances, and not in all of them. Okay, so the value judgments, they may enter through the back door of these positivistic social sciences, but only in certain conditions and characteristics. Again, Leo here replies by saying that the conditions in question, they are necessary when we are interested in any social phenomena. To study any social phenomena, these conditions come into play. And which conditions? Those conditions which need the inclusion of these value judgments, these moral judgments in these subjects. So must the social scientist not necessarily make the assumption that a healthy social life in this world is good, just as medicine necessarily makes the assumption that health and the healthy long life are good. So how Leo was trying to counter the arguments given to him, how he's trying to prove his points is that, let's take the example of medicine. Okay, somebody who practices medicine and medicine as a subject. What is the role of a medicine? Now, a medicine will say that health and healthy long life are good. These are necessary conditions, and also are not all factual assertions based on conditions or assumptions which, however, do not become questionable as long as we deal with facts, core facts that are the facts that even have causes. Okay, so a social scientist will always make the assumption of a healthy social life, of a good social life, or of a world that is good. Okay, like in the case of medicines also, a healthy long life and good health is good, is right, is necessary condition. So this is somewhere that we are including a value judgment in these positivistic social sciences also. The impossibility of a value-free political science can be shown most simply as follows. So through examples, Leo is trying to show us that no matter how positivistic we claim the political science to be, it is impossible for any positivistic social science to be value-free. There is an inclusion of value judgments no matter how hard we try. For example, to prove his point, he says, political science presupposes a distinction between political things and things which are not political. It presupposes, therefore, some answer to the question, what is political? In order to be truly scientific, political science would have to raise this question and to answer it explicitly and adequately. But it is impossible to define the political that is, that which is related in a relevant way to the polis, the country or the state, without answering the question of what constitutes this kind of society. Now, a society cannot be defined without reference to its purpose. The most well-known attempt to define the state without regard to its purpose admittedly led to definition which is derived from the modern type of state and which is fully applicable only to that type. It was an attempt to define the modern state without having first defined the state, but by defining the state, or rather civil society, with reference to its purpose when admits a standard in the light of which one must judge political actions and institutions. The purpose of civil society necessarily functions as a standard for judging of civil societies. Now, why it is impossible for political science to be value free is, in political science we discuss things which are political and which are not political, and to distinguish between the political and non-political things we need to have an idea of the society, of what political things construct the society. And to know the society or the state, then again we discuss about the modern state, the civil society. And of course, when we are discussing about the civil society, now what is this? When we discuss about a civil society, this is again a judgment, an evaluation of the society when it is civil. And civility, goodness, righteousness, justice, all of these are value judgments, value ideals. So, somewhere or the other, deep down, very indirectly or not indirectly, but these value judgments are included in the study of political science, which the political science which claims to be scientific in their approach, which claims that they are value free, that they are scientific in their approach and they do not include any value judgments. It's not possible, because again, to study political science we need to discuss about the type of the political and non-political things, and for that we need to discuss the state, the modern state, the civil society, and all of this. Again, the civil society has to include the good, bad, right, just, unjust, wrong, duty, all of these things. So it does shows that when we break down political science, somewhere we are making a value judgment, we are evaluating the society to be civil or uncivil, and that is how again a value judgment is added. The second point is that we're discussing. So in the first point we discussed how it is impossible that value judgments are present in positive social sciences also. The rejection of value judgments is based on the assumption that the conflicts between different values or value systems are essentially insoluble for human reason. Now, why is there a necessity, or why is there a trend to reject the value judgments? It is because more and more values should be accepted within the society. Okay, that it has been deemed there cannot be, like, this assumption, while generally taken to be sufficiently established, has never been proven. Its proof would require an effort of the magnitude of which went into the conception and elaboration of the critique of pure reason. It would require a comprehensive critique of evaluating reason. Now, the one reason why we reject value judgments is because the conflicts between different value or value systems are essentially insoluble for human reason. So one of the reasons why we ignore these value judgments is because we will never be able to, we are never able to win an argument against different value systems. That is something in relation to the cultural relativism that we have studied in the previous semesters, whose videos are available on my channel. So we discuss about how different systems, different cultures have different values, and we cannot really state or imply that one value system or one cultural system or one traditional system is better than the other, because all of them have different values and they have their valid reasons for having these different values within themselves. So in that case, for example, we discussed about the Eskimos, or we discussed about the Greeks and the tribes, the Indian tribes, I don't remember the name, that how they would kill and eat, how after the death of their forefathers they would eat their forefathers. The Chaldeans, if I'm not wrong, and the Greeks were totally disgusted by the thought, and the Greeks would cremate the body, and the Chaldeans, or what, the tribe, they were disgusted by the thought of burning the body of their forefathers after their death. So there is this thinking that now these are just two different values, two different value systems, and both of them have their own foundation, on both of them have their own reasons to being followed in the certain way. And that is why it's insoluble. It is impossible for the human to establish one value system better than the others, and that is why we disinclude the value judgments in our assumptions, in our in our studying of the subject, because these values are different in different cultures and different traditions all around the world, and they are incomparable because they have their own reasons for being that way. But this is not true. This assumption is not true. Okay, what we find in fact are sketchy observations which pretend to prove that this or that specific value conflict is insoluble. It is prudent to grant that there are value conflicts which cannot in fact be settled by human reason, but if we cannot decide which of two mountains whose peaks are hidden by clouds is higher than the other, cannot we decide that a mountain is higher than a molehill? If we cannot decide regarding a war between two neighboring nations which have been fighting each other for centuries, whose nation's cause is more just, cannot we decide that Jezebel's action against Naboth was inexcusable? The greatest representative of social science positivism, Max Weber, has postulated the insolubility of all value conflicts because his soul craved a universe in which failure, that bastard of forceful sinning accompanied by still more fateful fate instead of felicity and serenity, was to be the mark of human nobility. The belief that value judgments are not subject in the last analysis to rational control encourages the inclination to make irresponsible assertions regarding right and wrong or good and bad. So now here Leo is trying to say that you claim that all these different cultural traditions and societies and value systems are just different from each other, no are right, no are wrong. But then if we take this to be the final thing, then what if the two neighboring countries are fighting with each other? Who will then decide that whose cause is noble or whose cause is right or good or just in that case? So if we just continue to ignore the value judgments, then the society will become haywire because anybody will do anything and they would just claim it to be a value based system, and on the name of value or culture or tradition they would do anything. So uh, it is not possible that we try to claim something or a system or a tradition to be totally value free or judgment free. It has to have it has to have ethical judgments in it. The belief that value judgments are not subject in the last analysis to rational control encourages the inclination to make irresponsible assertions regarding right and wrong or good and bad. One evades serious discussion of serious issues by the simple device of passing them off as value problems. So, what one does is, when they are not able to find a solution to something, they just shift it in the arena of a value problem, that this conflict is happening just because two cultures are following two different value systems, and both of them are correct, and none of them can be disturbed or proven to be wrong because it is their value and their tradition. So one even creates the impression that all important human conflicts are value conflicts, whereas to say the least, many of these conflicts arise out of men's very agreement regarding values. So what these people claim is, even internationally they claim that this fight or this war is happening just because there are two conflicting value systems and values, and none of the values or their culture or tradition are wrong. Both of them are correct in their own places, and thus this conflict is insoluble. None of them can be proven right or wrong. But that is a wrong assumption, and that is a wrong approach. Using that approach, it doesn't mean that you just claim or deem any war or any fight, whether it is between two groups or two countries, to be correct in that sense. And in fact, one even creates the impression that all the important human conflicts that happen, they happen because of the value conflicts. It's not necessary, it's not important. But actually, in reality, least of them happen because of values. Most of them happen because of greed and power and politics and money and other reasons and resources and so many other reasons. So the least of them happen because of values. But what happens is that the most of them are claimed to be happening because of the value systems, the different value systems, and which is a very wrong approach. The belief that scientific knowledge, that is the kind of knowledge possessed or aspired to by modern science, is the highest form of human knowledge, implies a depreciation of pre-scientific knowledge. Now, when we say that the modern science today that is being practiced, which is value-free, judgment-free, ethically neutral, it is the highest form of knowledge. It's the most factual, most correct form of knowledge. When we claim such a thing, we instantly diminish the value, the importance, and the potential of the pre-scientific knowledge. Okay, if one takes into consideration the contrast between scientific knowledge of the world and pre-scientific knowledge of the world, one realizes that positivism preserves in a scarcely distinguished manner discards universal doubt of pre-scientific knowledge and his radical break with it. It certainly distrusts pre-scientific knowledge, which it likes to compare to folklore. So, when today people try to engage in modern science and scientific knowledge, what they do is they compare the pre-scientific knowledge to just a folklore. That the pre-scientific knowledge is not actual knowledge, but it's just a greater number of thought, by a collective thought by a greater number of people, by a majority of people, and thus it has become a knowledge. So what it does, it dismisses the potential and the power or the truth of the pre-scientific knowledge as being a knowledge, and it reduces it to be just a folklore, a collective thought of majority of people, which is not based on any evidences or any proof, and there is no guarantee that it is right or wrong. This superstition fosters all sorts of sterile investigations or complicated idiocies. Things which every 10-year-old child of normal intelligence knows are regarded as being in need of a scientific proof in order to become acceptable as facts. And the scientific proof, which is not only not necessary, is not even possible. So Leo Strauss, he tries to answer this, that you claim the pre-scientific knowledge to be just a folklore. So if it is a folklore, how is it possible that every 10-year child knows something? There are certain things that are common to every 10-year-old child. Now that 10-year-old child has not started with the studies of that scientific knowledge. Then how come every 10-year-old child in the world knows something about that particular topic or knows it in a certain way? So that may be pre-scientific knowledge, but that is not a folklore. If every other person has that knowledge, that means it is an established knowledge, and it does not even need the support of facts or evidences to prove that it is scientific in its sense. To illustrate this by the simplest example, all studies in social science presuppose that its devotees can tell human beings from other beings. This most fundamental knowledge was not acquired by them in classrooms, and this knowledge is not transformed by social science into scientific knowledge, but retains its initial status without any modification throughout. If this pre-scientific knowledge is not knowledge, all scientific studies which stand or fall with it lack the character of knowledge. Now, there's a very common example. All the social sciences claim that they have the social sciences, the subject has the ability to lead humans to distinguish between the humans and human beings from other beings, that it is the social scientists that hold the power, or the social scientists that will teach a person who is a human being and who is not. Then that means every 10-year-old child, if the 10-year-old child knows that a dog is a dog and a dog is not a human being, that is not pre-scientific knowledge, that is just a folklore. Then if it is a folklore, how come every 10-year-old child knows it? The preoccupation with scientific proof of things which everyone knows well enough and better without scientific proof leads to the neglect of that thinking or that reflection which must precede all scientific studies if these studies are to be relevant. So what happens is, when we dismiss any knowledge to be unscientific just because it has not been proven by evidences or by facts or something, then we are missing out something very important. It's not necessary, it doesn't even need a scientific proof, because practically everybody by a certain age, or a 10-year-old, 8-year-old person, every 8-year-old child knows about it. Then that does not mean that it is scientific only. It is pre-scientific, and it is not necessary that there needs to be a scientific proof attached to it for it to become a knowledge. A knowledge can be very well established knowledge even without the scientific proof attached to it. The scientific study of politics is often presented as ascending from the ascertainment of political facts, that is, of what has happened hitherto in politics, to this formulation of laws whose knowledge would permit the prediction of future political events. This goal is taken as a matter of course without a previous investigation as to whether the subject matter with which political science deals admits of adequate understanding in terms of laws, or whether the universals through which political things can be understood as what they are must not be conceived of it entirely different terms. So, scientific concern with political facts, relations of political facts, recurrent relations of political facts, or laws of political behavior requires isolation of the phenomena which it is studying. But if this isolation is not to lead to irrelevant or misleading results, one must see the phenomena in question within the whole to which they belong, and one must clarify that whole, that is the whole political or politico-social order. Example, one cannot arrive at a kind of knowledge which deserves to be called scientific of group politics if one does not reflect on what genus of political orders is presupposed if there is to be group politics at all, and what kind of political order is presupposed by the specific group politics which one is studying. But one cannot clarify the character of a specific democracy or of democracy in general without having a clear understanding of the alternatives of democracy. So, scientific political scientists are inclined to leave it at the distinction between democracy and authoritarianism, that is, they absolutize the given political order by remaining within a horizon which is defined by the given political order and its opposite. The scientific approach tends to lead to the neglect of the primary or fundamental questions and therewith to thoughtless acceptance of received opinion. So, what happens when we claim to be studying the scientific knowledge, or when we put the scientific knowledge on a higher pedestal than pre-scientific knowledge, is we lose certain terms and it is well established fact that for scientific knowledge to be established, we need a pre-scientific knowledge of something, which is of course pre-scientific, which is not based on facts and opinions, because sometimes the experiences or the general thought or the collective thought of people, which is the pre-scientific knowledge. It's not talking about the folklore or the folks or the general opinion, but yes, something which is there. It may not be proven by facts, but yes, it is present and everybody knows about it. That is a pre-scientific knowledge. And sometimes the knowledge of the pre-scientific knowledge, and not sometimes, it is every time important for one to know the pre-scientific knowledge, because before the pre, we cannot really reach to the scientific knowledge of anything. For example, when the the political scientist, when he or she tries to define the difference between say democracy and authoritarianism, that one political scientist, he or she scales it down to just the opposites of both of them. A democracy is this and authoritarianism is this, and they would just state their opposites. Okay, so the scientific approach tends to lead to the neglect of the primary or fundamental questions and therewith to thoughtless acceptance of received opinions. So, what happens in a scientific knowledge is, because we only deal with a very small size of facts, in scientific knowledge, we don't really deal with everything of that phenomena. We deal with just a certain kind and certain relation of the phenomena, certain facts about it, certain group of facts about it. So we leave out some things. Okay, as regards, we leave out the fundamental questions and we just thoughtlessly accept, like talking about democracy and authoritarianism, one would always, in scientific knowledge, one would just state its opposites. But before defining the opposites, we also need to look at the fundamental questions of democracy and authoritarianism. As regards these fundamental questions, our friends of scientific exactness are strangely unexacting. To refer again to the most simple and at the same time decisive example, political science requires clarification of what distinguishes political things from things which are not political. It requires that the question be raised and answered, what is political? This question cannot be dealt with scientifically, but not only dialectically. And dialectical treatment necessarily begins pre scientific knowledge and takes it most seriously. So that is a very well established fact, and all of us realize this, the need of pre-scientific knowledge, that we, no matter how much we claim that it is the scientific knowledge which is correct, and no matter how much a positivistic social scientist only deals with scientific knowledge, what we do by this is we ignore the importance and the foundation that pre-scientific knowledge has built for that scientific knowledge. It is there, it is inevitable. In every scientific knowledge is included the pre-scientific knowledge. But what we do is we claim that there is no pre-scientific knowledge, but that is not true. Pre-scientific knowledge or common sense knowledge is thought to be discredited by Copernicus and the succeeding natural science. But the fact that what we may call telescopic, microscopic knowledge is very fruitful in certain areas does not entitle one to deny that there are things which can only be seen as what they are if they are seen with the unarmed eye, or more precisely if they are seen in the perspective of the citizen, as distinguished from the perspective of the scientific observer. So it is true, the pre-scientific knowledge is claimed to be common sense, that it is a common sense thing and it's not a scientific knowledge of any sort. Everybody knows about it because it is common sense, it is there, it is already present in it. But then one cannot ignore that a perspective of a citizen, how it is different from the perspective of a scientific observer, because the perspective of a scientific observer is always limited to the scientific facts. And we have very well discussed that when we are dealing with positive sciences, there's one characteristic of positive sciences is that it deals with only one set of facts about it. Okay, if they're talking about the characteristics of something, we only talk about the characteristics, only one set of facts about it. We don't look into the different areas of that subject matter. And that is also important, because when we look something through a scientific approach, we generally ignore the other facts about it which are also important, which are also a part of that subject matter, maybe of a different area. If one denies this, one will repeat the experience of Gulliver with the nurse in Brobdy gang and become entangled in the kind of research projects by which he was amazed in Laputa. So these are just references that is being made by Leo Strauss, but what he really points out to say is that a citizen, the perspective of a citizen will be much broader than a scientific observer, because the perspective of a scientific observer will always be scaled down to a certain set of facts only. Positivism necessarily transforms itself into historicism by virtue of its orientation by the model of natural science. Social science is in danger of mistaking peculiarities of, say, mid-20th century United States, or more generally of modern Western society, for the essential character of human society. So to avoid this danger, if it is compelled to engage in cross-cultural research in the study of other cultures, both present and past, but in making its effort, it misses the meaning of those other cultures because it interprets them through a conceptual scheme which originates in modern Western society, which reflects that particular society and which fits at best only that particular society. Now what happens is, because we're talking about scientific knowledge of the positivistic sciences, which has a widespread base in the Western society, so what problem we face by this is that we generally use the human society to be synonymous with the Western society. That is not at all true, because the Western society has so many ideals which are not present in, say, the African or the European or the Asian societies. But because we are claiming it to be scientific knowledge, and we are really interested in the scientific knowledge and the positivistic sciences, we think the Western society to be the general character of human society, whereas it's not at all true. But in fact, the Western society is a smaller part of the human society, and there are bigger parts of human society. The European societies, the Asian societies, the African societies are much different. So to avoid this danger, it is compelled to engage in cross-cultural research in the study of other cultures, both present and past. But in making this effort, it misses the meaning of those other cultures because it interprets them through a conceptual scheme which originates in modern Western society, which reflects that particular society and which fits at best only at that particular society. Now what happens is, the positivistic sciences are looked through the perspective of the Western society. But then what it does is it misses the other societies, as we have given the example of, the other societies. But then again, Now what they have done is to try and overcome this, scaling down to one society. They engage in cross cultural research. But in that cross cultural research, again, what the problem is, that even the judgment, or matlab, even the evaluation of those cultures are done through the perspective or the standard of a modern society. So we not really grasp the essence of that particular culture, but we just compare it from the standard of the western culture, of the western society, and from that standard we engage with that culture. So even if we are engaging in a cross cultural research, we are basically giving importance to the western society, because the western society acts as a threshold when we are studying the other cultures, other societies. To avoid this danger, social science must attempt to understand those cultures as they understand or understood themselves. The understanding primarily required of the social scientists is historical understanding. So, to not only engage in that kind of a thing, to escape that, and to really understand the cultures as they are, we need to look at the historical understanding of it also. Historical understanding becomes the basis of a truly empirical science of society. Now, empirical is something which is based on experiences and not facts. So, the historical understanding becomes the basis of a truly empirical science of society, that the actual science, the experienced society that it is. But if one considers the infinity of the task of historical understanding, one begins to wonder whether historical understanding take does not take the place of the scientific study of society. Furthermore, social science is said to be a body of true propositions about social phenomena. The propositions are answers to questions. What valid answers, objectively valid answers are, may be determined by the rules or principles of logic, but the questions depend on one's direction of interest and hence on one's values, that is, on subjective principles. Now, it is the direction of interest and not logic which supplies the fundamental concepts. It is therefore not possible to divorce from each other the subjective and objective elements of social science. The objective answers receive their meaning from the subjective questions. So, when we are to study about a society, when we are to study about a culture, what attempt is made is to study it from the perspective of logic, valid propositions, but all of these are very objective. But these objective answers are again can only be claimed or derived through subjective questions of what one's interest in studying that society is. If I would give an example, let's say you try to study the Indian society of the earlier times uh, through different historians or travelers or contemporaries, and all of them will have different accounts of the Indian society, and that is because they have different interest. Okay, some contemporaries may have their interest in the administration of India, of how the India was run at that time. Other travelers may have had the interest of establishing their businesses or for business purposes, so their analysis and evaluation of India would be much different, because their primary goal would be the market, the buying capacity, and the interest of the consumer. So it is true, to even if a society is studied, it is studied in very different senses, because it depends on the interest of the observer, that what is the goal of the observer and studying that society. And in any social phenomena, no matter how hard we try, this subjectivity is included. Whenever no matter how scientifically we try to approach something, there is a subjectivity of the observer, of the scientist included in that study. The propositions are answer to the questions. What are it? Okay. Now it is a direction of interest and not logic which supplies the fundamental concept. It is therefore not possible to divorce from each other the subjective and objective elements of social science. If one does not relapse into the decade Platonism, which is underlying the notion of timeless values, one must conceive of the values embodied in a given social science as dependent on the society to which the social science in question belongs, that is, on history. Not only is social science superseded by historical studies, social science itself proves to be historical. So, somewhere or the other, even if we not talk about the society per se, In any social science, history plays a very important role. Important role, I mean to say. So, any social science is superseded by historical studies. Okay, no matter whatever social science we are studying, be it say psychology or sociology, geography, history, political science, all of them have a historical perspective to it, and the historical studies of that particular subject, of that particular social science, plays a very very important role. And this you may also have noticed. Okay, we also studied philosophy, you may have studied history, you may have studied economics, sociology, geography. All of these subjects include the history of that particular subject, because the historical perspective plays a very important role. Reflection on social science as a historical phenomena leads to the relativization of social science and ultimately of modern science generally. As a consequence, modern science comes to be viewed as one historically relative way of understanding things, which is not in principle superior to alternative ways of understanding. So, for the study of any social science, the historical perspective of that is very important. And the historically relative way is not in principle superior or inferior to other alternative ways of understanding. It is one of the ways, but yes, it is very very important. It is only at this point that we come face to face with the serious antagonist of political philosophy, historicism. After having reached its full growth, historicism is distinguished from positivism by the following characteristics. Now, historicism is different from positivism. Now, let's talk about historicism versus positivism. So yes, historicism is when we trace the development of any, if in this case when we are talking about social sciences, we trace the development of a social science through its history. And positivism, that we have already discussed, that it only deals with the facts, the observed facts. Now, the difference between how historicism and positivism is, it abandons the distinction between facts and values, because every understanding, however theoretical, implies specific evaluation. So no matter how theoretical we go, we need to have, or we have some kind of evaluation, some kind of moral and value judgments. It denies the authoritative character of modern science, which appears as only one among the many forms of man's intellectual orientation in the world. So, when we study historicism, it denies that modern science is not the highest or the only form of intellectual, knowledge in the world. It is just one among many other forms, or many other orientations, intellectual orientations. It refuses to regard the historical process as fundamentally progressive, or more generally stated as reasonable. Okay, so so it refuses to regard the historical process as fundamentally progressive, or more generally stated as reasonable. That no, it is not in that sense as reasonable or progressive. That is, historicism or history is just what has already passed by. And it denies the relevance of the evolutionist thesis by contending that the evolution of man out of non-man cannot make intelligible man's humanity. So that evolution of a man out of non-man cannot make intelligible man's humanity. His historicism rejects the question of the good society, that is to say, of the good society, because of the essentially historical character of society and of human thought. There is no essential necessity for raising the question of the good society. This question is not in principle coeval with man. Its very possibility is the outcome of a mysterious dispensation of fate. The crucial issue concerns the status of those permanent characteristics of humanity, such as the distinction between the noble and the base, which are admitted by the thoughtful historicist. Can these permanencies be used as criteria for distinguishing between good and bad dispensions of fate? The historicist answers this question in the negative. He looks down on the permanencies in question because of their objective, common, superficial, and rudimentary character. To become relevant, they would have to be completed, and their completion is no longer common, but historical. So now we are here, we are trying to distinguish between historicism and positivism, and how full growth historicism distinguishes itself from positivism. So we have discussed the 4 points, that the distinction between facts and values is abandoned, because in historicism there was nothing like, facts and values were not really different. Today in modern science, it is when we distinguish between facts and values. In historicism, facts and values were not distinguished. So it denies the authoritative character of modern science. So of course, according to historicism, it's not that modern science is the highest intellectual orientation of the man. Okay, because throughout history, it's not that modern science was always prevalent. It is prevalent today, popular today. Okay, again, it refuses to regard the historical processes as fundamentally progressive. So according to historicism, it's not that all the historical processes were progressive in their way. Okay, it's not necessarily that whatever has happened in history was progressive in nature. Okay, and or everything that happened in history was reasonable. It's not necessary. And also it denies the relevance of the evolutionist thesis by contending that the evolution of man out of non-man cannot take intelligible man's humanity. So very much when we talk about the evolution through the perspective of history, so the general notion of what evolution was, that from being a non-man and developing a humanistic characteristic, a humane characteristic, so that evolution has been denied. Okay, so historicism rejects the question of the good society, that the good society, because of the essential historical character of society and of humans thought, there is no essential necessity for raising the question of the good society. That in historicism, it's not that whatever was the society before throughout history was the good society. So there is a rejection of the importance of the good society. And the crucial issue concerns the status of those permanent characteristics of humanity, such as the distinction between the noble and the base, which are admitted by the thoughtful historicist. Can these permanencies be used as criteria for distinguishing between good and bad dispensions of fate? And if you come down to become relevant, they would have to be completed, and their completion is no longer common but historical. It was the contempt of these permanencies which permitted the most radical historicist in 1933 to submit to, or rather to welcome as a dispensation of fate, the verdict of the least wise and least moderate part of his nation, while it was in its while it was in its least wise and least moderate mood, that at the same time to speak of wisdom and moderation. So the more radical historicist in 1992 submit to, rather to welcome as a dispensation of the verdict of the least wise. So what happened in the events of 1933 would rather seem to have proved, if such proof was necessary, that man cannot abandon the question of the good society, and that he cannot free himself from the responsibility for answering it by deferring to history or to any other power different from his own reason. So even in 1993, the common good, the common society, now we see reason was very important even at that time. And he cannot free himself from the responsibility for answering it by deferring to history. You cannot just say that it was history, or transferring the power of present to the history, but of course it was again the works of the reason even in history that particular progression took place.